Welcome, everyone. This is the Abundant Investor Podcast, and we are Beth and Christine, your hosts. We are here to show you how you can live your rich life right now with the power of an abundance mindset and tools the wealthy have used for years that are accessible to the rest of us. Things like real estate investing and using the powerful benefits of life insurance. We're so glad you're here. Now let's dive in.
Hello, everybody. It's Beth and Christine from the Abundant Investor.
How's everybody today? We are so excited for today's episode. We're diving into the decade that is the 30s. We're calling it the Diaper Decade because that's when a lot of people start to have their children, and this whole new era of having a family is a very common topic for so many people.
It's a busy time. Oh my gosh, your world changes a lot when you have children.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we know. I have 4 children.
I have 3.
Yeah, so we know what it's like. All of a sudden, you're plugging along, doing fine. You're maybe 2 incomes. You're into a groove. You're making some money, and you have a baby, and everything changes.
Everything changes, and so do your finances.
Yeah, exactly.
So we want to dive into that a little bit today. First, though, however, we want to share with you, we have a series of core values here at the Abundant Investor, which our company and really our partnership is really founded on. And we wanted to share one of those with you. We thought it would be a good idea to start sharing those at the beginning of our episode so that you get to know us and you get to know what we're all about. So one of the super cool things that we learned about each other when we first got to know each other was that we are both college athletes, and we've both been athletic and part of athletic teams for as long as we can remember. And one of the things that instilled in us, each of us, that we bring to this company is the feeling and the promise of a team and being part of a team, especially a women's team, and the power to lift each other up and support each other. And so that is so foundational to how we work together and also why we're here supporting other women.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, when you look at the female CEOs, which sadly, it's only 15% of CEOs of major Fortune 500 companies are female. But there's a staggering number that says 85% of them were also college athletes. So when Christine and I talk about this, we say, why do we think that is? And why were we attracted to doing this together? And what makes us entrepreneurial and business people and what have you? And I have managed people my whole career. I've always managed salespeople, in male or female. I can always tell when somebody was an athlete. And I think back to Christine's point around being a team member. Being a team member means so much. It means you have to sacrifice yourself sometimes. It means you have to show up and work hard and do it on not only on behalf of yourself, but on behalf of your team members. It means that sometimes in college you couldn't go to the parties because you had practice the next morning.
Oh, isn't that true?
Yeah, and that sacrifice and that, there's skills that you learn along the way about being part of something that's bigger than what you are. That translates so great into work life.
Yes. And
I've always seen that my top performers, it's so interesting. I look back, they were almost inevitably all athletes.
Yeah. I think you nailed it when you said you're part of something bigger than yourself, right? Because you can see beyond your own needs and concerns. And I think it keeps you from playing the victim and feeling sorry for yourself. You've got to keep showing up for the rest of the team, and they're always there to support you.
Absolutely. And that's we bring this up at the beginning of our episode because it's how we're going to treat you. When we talk about some of these products today, there's ways you could structure these products so that we would make a lot more money. But that's not what we're about. We're about transparency, and we're part of your team.
Absolutely.
And in doing that, we want to do what's right for you. And so that is one of our promises that we bring to every client interaction that we have, that our goal is to make you more successful as part of our team.
Absolutely.
And not to put our needs first.
Absolutely. And let's just be really upfront. One of the most common misperceptions about life insurance is that agents sell whole life insurance. Whole life insurance is permanent insurance for the commissions. There's a bigger commission up front. And while that is true, we're really, really more focused on a properly structured whole life policy when we sell those. For you and for you to be successful, because it's made us more successful and we want to share that success with you. And we're always going to look out for your best interest before we we would never put ourselves first with our clients.
Absolutely. So let's dive into it today.
Let's
talk about the diaper decade. And in doing so, we thought, let's talk a little bit about, made me think back to being a mom for the first time and some of these stresses. And Christine made a decision to buy term life insurance. We didn't do that in my household, and we're going to talk a little bit about why and how that worked out. So Christine, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about how you came about buying term life?
I was just thinking about this, Beth, and we were talking about when I started having kids buying term life insurance. And I remember where I was when I bought it. I remember where I was standing, and it was a house that I had after my second daughter was born. So I actually waited until my second daughter 2 years later was born after my first. And my husband and I had been saying, probably like many of you, if you have young kids, if you don't have life insurance already, it's one of those things you say, we need to do this. We need to do this. And now we like to say, I get to do this. Mm-hmm. But at the time, it was this stressor. And we finally, I forget exactly how it came to be, but we reached out to a friend of mine, former teammate of mine. Her husband was selling life insurance. And he said, you want term life insurance, right? And I felt like I was so ignorant. I wanted to pretend at the time that I knew something about it. And I said, yeah, I think so. I didn't know, though. Yeah. I really didn't know. He said, yeah, you probably want term. He said, the premiums are much lower, and you get a 30-year term policy, and it'll last you while your children are young. We went ahead. My husband and I each purchased these term life insurance policies. So we were in our early to mid, I was in my early 30s. My husband was in his mid 30s. And we purchased these policies. So, and like any life insurance policy, you have some, a nurse will come over, they will check your vitals and make sure that you are healthy, or like understand what your health is so that they can rate it. And I remember that process. And then, off to the races. Like now we have insurance. I had a little bit from my employer, like you had experience with, Beth. And I just felt like, okay, this is a decent amount of coverage. If God forbid something should happen to me, my family will be protected. And every year in December, we would get the invoice and pay that premium. And that was that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's how a lot of people do that. And there's actually nothing wrong with that. But I think there's where we've come to learn, and we'll talk about this in a moment, that there's another option, and there's other options that might work even better. And I'll just talk a little bit about my experience. At the time when I was starting to have a family, I was working for a large corporation, and I had, as part of my benefit, a life insurance. And so I figured, I was covered. And then I left after having 3 children, and I went off to be an independent contractor in a whole nother field in real estate, and never had that life insurance again, and never even really thought about it, because I figured, in my mind, I had checked that box, only to find out that I was pretty highly exposed as being, a key contributor to our income, and not having any life insurance or disability insurance or anything like that. So God forbid anything had happened to me in those early days. Gosh, I exposed us to a lot of risk unknowingly. So
and
that's
thankfully, everyone is now
okay.
Like the children are much
great.
older.
Yeah, we're doing great. But we want to get ahead of that for our listeners. We want to. There's no reason. People should be able to make changes in their life from a career, maybe where you are working for a big company, and then especially if you go to work for your own or be an entrepreneur or something.
It's much more common these days.
Yeah, exactly. There's some things you should be thinking about as it relates to protection for your family. So
absolutely.
That's a little bit about our story.
Yeah. And if you think about it, there's so much earning potential over our lifetime, right? If something should happen to one of the partners, or if you're a single parent, especially, something should happen to you, there's a lifetime of earnings that is not realized now. So having life insurance is so important. And like you said, I think term life it's fine, right? And the reason why we love these more permanent life insurance products is that they're more strategic. There's so much more we can do with them. And I think that we don't learn about them as easily, because I know that other people I know had very similar experiences to learning what are my options. Someone said, you don't want to buy whole life, you want to buy term life. You don't necessarily need permanent insurance. Term will be fine for you. And it's the premium is much more quote unquote affordable.
Right. Until you're 60.
Until that 30-year term is over.
Yeah. And how many people are we getting calls from now, Christine, right?
That are in their 50s, 60s.
So if you buy this when you're 35, when you're 65, you still could live for another 30 years. I mean, let's face it. People are, when you go to requalify it, if you try to buy a 30-year policy when you're 65, there goes that inexpensive monthly premium. It's through the roof. So making this decision about how to structure this when you're young and hopefully very healthy is much, much better because it will last you your entire life. And people are living so long these days. So I'm sorry to interrupt. I know you think about something else, but I think it's important to recognize that we are getting a lot of calls from people that are saying, oh, can I just re-up? And it's not like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like one of the things that we talk about quite a bit is that we fall into these beliefs and patterns of what's happening around us all the time. And so what's very common, what we see we experienced ourselves, most of our peers, our friends went through the same thing. We got a 9-to-5 job with an employer. That employer offered us a benefits package. We took them up on that 401k. They probably had maybe a year. Oftentimes, a company will provide a year or a year and a half, 2 years of life insurance, meaning that your salary, so if you're making $100,000, if it's one time your salary, you get $100,000 in life insurance. If it's 2x, obviously $200,000. The company you're working for will offer you a package and you'll say, sign me up. And you feel like, yes, I checked the boxes. I'm doing my job as a responsible adult. And there are many other things you can do as a young person and at any age, really, to set yourself up for success financially. One of the things we always talk about is one of our favorite books is reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad, just to get a different perspective, it's a bestseller. It's been around for years, by the way. This is not a flash new. This is nothing new. To get a different perspective on how to think about money.
And really how you think about your time and how you trade your time for money. I mean, there's 100%. A lot to that book. It's not just about real estate. It's about thinking outside of the proverbial box and not just following the status quo, which it's so easy to do.
So easy. So I love that. And if you're in any entrepreneurial circles, whether it's real estate investing, whether it's coaching, whether it's starting your own business, teaching courses online, or, maybe you have a brick and mortar, entrepreneurs tend to know that book and they tend to know this outside of the box way of thinking. And there's a reason why some of these people become so successful is because they do think outside the box. And we're not talking some crazy scheme that is, what's hot right now. These are tried and true practices that have been around for a very long time.
Hundreds of years.
Yes.
Why don't we talk a little bit of Christine? Because it's interesting. When you and I first started talking, I was telling you what I was doing working with the ultra high net worth. And you were telling me that you were using whole life and you really educated me on it. And so you had term life and then you became a coach and you were working in a circle of these really entrepreneurial, smart, extremely successful coaches, and you learned about a way that they were managing their money a little bit different using whole life. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. One of the things I've done with my coaching business is invested in masterminds. And these are some of the most elevating experiences that I've had in the last 5 years or so. Being part of a mastermind is surrounding yourself with a group of fellow entrepreneurial, typically really interested in personal growth, those types of people, to expose yourself to the way that they're doing business. You all share the mastermind. You all actually, you share the way that you're doing things and teach each other and learn from each other. The times that I've done it, there's been a coach as well who is leading the mastermind and coaching individuals. And I would say it's so powerful because you learn so much just by watching the coach other people in the mastermind, and you're learning things all the time. So one of the best things I did when I joined my first mastermind was got really curious about the way that people were building wealth and making money and running their businesses. And it actually started with a peer of mine saying, she was running 2 7-figure businesses at the time. And she said, we rent our house. And I said, isn't that interesting? Most people with kids who are successful, in my mind, owned their house. And so I started asking some questions, and I started asking her about how are you making financial decisions? And she introduced me to a group of wealth strategists. And I really didn't know exactly what that entailed until we got on the phone with them and we started to talk about permanent life insurance and using it as a tool to lower taxes, to save money for the future in a way that would reduce our tax bill, where we had so much access to our funds, and essentially to build a cash reserve inside of a life insurance policy that we would have access to for our personal investing in our businesses. And so thus began my education, and it made a lot of sense. It was definitely, something that was relatively new to me. And I realized that this was how a lot of the wealthy, just like your clients, Beth, the ultra high net worth, and you don't have to be ultra high net worth to use this. It's not just those folks. We're tapping into the power of this tool. And when properly structured, it can create generational wealth. It can support passive income. It can support active income. It is really, really powerful. So after, much education and, learning and really believing in this, we decided to purchase permanent insurance. So my husband and I both took out policies, and we are now using them to fund our business. So we Beth and I get into the mechanics of how it works in other episodes, but all is to say, it wasn't a replacement for our term insurance, though it could be if I didn't already have term insurance. I opted to keep some of my term insurance because I did purchase it when I was about 30. So it's very low cost for me. So it supplements. So we're well insured. And now I know the value of this permanent life product. And, we always say, what do I wish I knew when I was 22? I wish when I was 22 that I set up a whole life policy then and started to use it in lieu of maxing out my 401k, which I used to do. Not to say, I would keep my 401k up to my company match, and then I would put my money into a whole life policy and start building that bank for myself.
Absolutely. And so thank you for sharing all that. Since we were talking, my husband and I have also started our own whole life policies. And it's just, I feel so much better about knowing that I have a plan in place. God forbid something happened to my husband and I. B, we actually added a term rider on top of what we were doing, just so we had, thinking about like you were saying, you think about how much insurance you need, looking at our income and everything that we would need to replace, our income, if something happened to us. So you can do a term life rider on top of it and you get even more. But typically what we do is try to structure it with the least amount of death benefit so you have that cash value. But we can do really a customized plan. That's like we were saying at the beginning, that's what's best for you. And so, in doing research and in talking to a lot of people and getting out there, I recently had a chance to meet a gentleman who has 3 daughters, and he started whole life policies for them when they were in diapers. And they are now in college. One's actually out of college. 2 are in college. He was able to fund their college tuition and also have money left over so that he'll be able to help them buy their first home with this policy.
Wow.
I mean, it's the power of how it can be used over the long term is so important. So what I wish I knew is, the compounding interest on this is so important. So when we started this conversation, when you're in your 30s or whatever age you are and you have that first child, there's so much coming at you.
So much.
There's so much. I mean, you have a whole new routine. You're not sleeping. You're in charge of this human being. There's no manual for that, and there's a couple books.
All the things you're buying.
Yeah, it's a whole, your world is really turned upside down. Before that happens, I would suggest to think about this because you don't have to wait till you have the diapers in your house to set these up.
Right.
And so as you're, you have 9 months typically, not always, but generally to prepare, I would add this to the list of things to start to get educated about because it takes a while. Like Christine said, I mean, we took a while to make the decision to do this. And I was licensed to do it.
Right.
And it still took me a while to make a decision and get fully educated. We have a couple of great books that we'll put in the show notes that can really, like, very easily, they're short reads, explain the details, and other videos. And so I would suggest strongly to really start thinking about it before you have children. And if you are sitting here listening to this and you, like me, I have 4 kids and you haven't done it, it's okay. Take a deep breath. We can help you with that too. It's never too late. It's not even cost prohibitive. It was really, cost effective for my husband and I to do it, and we're in our 50s. So it's best to do it in your 30s because of that compound interest and how it could be used time and time again for things like races and sports teams and college and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But it's never too late. So,
right. And when you say it's great for all those things, just to be clear, we're talking about borrowing against the policy.
That's right.
You can take a loan from your policy at any time, and your money continues to grow uninterrupted. So it continues to gain compound interest and grow within the policy. And you get to take a loan for whatever your expenses, and then you get to pay yourself back. So I think, even we talk about folks in their 20s and our children, like setting these up for our kids, because we know the power of them. And when you do start earlier, they tend to be less costly because you are in very good health.
Exactly. So you can even insure your child.
Yeah.
Your child could be the insured, and they can do it as early as 2 weeks after they're born.
Amazing.
You can set the policy up for them. So there's so many great options.
Yes.
So one thing I just want to cover while we're on this topic of being in your 30s is another way to think about is how you set up your buckets of where you put your money. Yeah. And I like to call it the 3-bucket strategy. We've learned this from other people in the business. The first bucket is your taxable bucket. And that is where it's going to be things like your typical checking and savings account. Maybe you have a high yield savings account right now. Rates are higher than they have been in the past. It's your brokerage account where you may be trading stocks and what have you. And that's being taxed annually on any dividends that you're getting. And then it's being taxed as you make sales and get capital gains, short-term or long-term capital gains. So that's a taxable bucket. We suggest that you have that bucket. You keep 3 to 6 months of living expenses in that bucket, but maybe not more than that, because I think we could use the third bucket that I'm going to talk about for any excess there. The second bucket is what Christine was just talking about, and that's your 401k, your tax deferred. So it's money that's coming out of your paycheck before you pay taxes. It's going into this tax deferred bucket. It's growing and compounding tax-free all those years until you decide to use it. You can't touch it until you're 59 and a half. But once you start pulling money out of that bucket, it's being taxed at whatever rate you're at that age. And it's being taxed as ordinary income, which is the highest level that you can get taxed at. So there's some things you want to think about that. I mean, the company match we talked about is free money. Take it. But beyond that, you may want to reconsider if you have extra money and you can afford to save more money, then you should maybe think about this third bucket, and that's your tax-free bucket. And that tax-free bucket really has 2 options to it. One is a Roth IRA. And a Roth IRA right now is, you could put up to $6,500 into it. Okay. But it also has limits in terms of how much income you have. So if you're a couple making more than $189,000 a year, you actually don't get access to that. You can't
use a Roth IRA.
So that's a great option if you're underneath those thresholds and what have you.
And put up to $6,500.
Yep, exactly. And then the second option underneath this tax-free bucket is what we've been talking about this whole time. And it's what we like to call properly structured high cash value life insurance. And that can be either whole insurance.
Let's just say that again.
Okay, properly structured, meaning that we want to get as much cash available into the policy and reduce the death benefit. So it's properly structured to benefit you, not to benefit us. High cash value. So like I just said, as much high cash value as possible.
Meaning you can access that pool of money.
Money that you have available to borrow against. Life insurance, and it's permanent life insurance. And there's 2 kinds of these things. There's whole life that we've both used, and there's also something called an indexed universal life, an IUL. And so we'll have other podcasts where we'll break down the details of that. We have an example of how you could use whole life to fund a real estate investing. It's a 4-minute video that we'll keep in our show notes. We show an example of a 30-year-old woman putting $15,000 in a year until she's 45 into a policy. And then at age 37, buying an investment property by borrowing $90,000 from the account. It's really powerful.
It'll really knock your socks off in terms of how the money grows. And like now that she's got assets that are growing, plus her money's compounding. Like you talk about passive income. This is a beautiful example.
And it's setting your family up for generational wealth. So it's a great time to think about it when you're in your 30s. Diapers or no diapers.
Exactly. You don't need to have one of diapers for this.
Exactly. So that we'll put that link to that 4-minute video on our show notes. And we're always available to do a personal one-on-one call. We'll also have a link to set that up. And then you can follow us on Instagram. We're on TikTok. We're on Facebook and on YouTube.
Yep. We've got a lot more information about this and how you can leverage it no matter what decade you're in. We're a little bit partial to the 30s, I think, because so many people are thinking about life insurance to begin with at this age. And if you want to do things a little bit differently, if you want to think outside the box, build generational wealth, really think about the long-term strategy. So, and I think we love this too, right, Beth? Because another one of our values is like living life now and not necessarily waiting for the future, saying, oh, in retirement, I want to do that, right? Like we want to live life and get the most out of it now. And this is a way to start to build passive income and then leverage a policy like this to fund that. So that you can be making money while you sleep or doing something that you love. And maybe it starts as a side hustle and then it turns into something full time. So many people today which is so great, are thinking outside of that 9 to 5, typical W-2. How can I do something different? And with those types of jobs, with those opportunities, you don't necessarily have the employer saying, here's our great benefits package. You've got to think about constructing that for yourself. So, and the other thing I'll say too, is a lot of people we know especially their mid to late 30s, 40s are thinking about, what do I do? Like they're thinking about career change. What can I do now that actually is more fulfilling to me?
It's going to light me up.
That's going to light me up because I want to be in control of my destiny. People want more freedom. They want more command over their schedule. They want more flexibility. And when their 9 to 5 job isn't providing that anymore, they're not rising the ladder or just getting the fulfillment they once did. They want an alternative. And this is something that pairs really nicely with that.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Christine.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. All right. We'll be back in our next episode where we'll talk about how to use life insurance maybe when you're in your 40s. So
Love it.
Jump in.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Abundant Investor Podcast and learned something new. We would love to hear from you. And if you did get something from this episode, please subscribe and rate this podcast so more people can find it and live their rich lives too. And remember, an abundant mindset means there's always plenty to go around, and through giving, we receive.